Hey, welcome, fellow human beings, to the podcast Addiction, Abuse, Recovery by Matt Logan Speaks. I am Matt Logan. However, I'm not going to be your host. Our host for this podcast is Sherry Irvin, who has personal, unfortunate experience with addiction and abuse, but she has been in recovery for more than 8 years now. Part of Matt Logan Speaks, we want to just share other people's stories in the hopes that it will help you through your day, that it's just another tool in your toolbox to get you through the day. So please help me welcome your host, Sherry Irvin.
Hi everyone, my name is Sherry Irvin. I have with me here today special guest Tiffany Hunsley Hall. Tiffany is the founder and director of Recoveries Happening here in Rochester, Minnesota. Tiffany has a license in social work, and she is also a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. She has a wealth of information. She has been on many panels, and I think that what also makes Tiffany very beneficial to her organization is that she is a woman in long-term recovery herself. On a personal note, I have had the pleasure of knowing Tiffany for over 15 years. And not only is she a great friend, but she has also been a mentor to me. So thank you very much for coming today. I am so excited about this. And I'm just ecstatic that you were my first guest on the Addiction, Abuse, and Recovery podcast. So welcome.
Thank you.
So my first question that I have for you today is if you could tell us a little bit about your story and how the inception of Recoveries Happening started. So basically your story and what made you decide to take on such a huge undertaking as building up Recoveries Happening to where it is now. I mean, you were serving thousands within the community, not to mention the outlying communities. Where did that come from?
You know, I think looking at the name of your podcast, Abuse, Addiction, Recovery, that's where it all comes from. And, you know, being from this community, I've been in Olmsted, Rochester community since 1978, the year of the flood, as a 9-year-old girl.
Yes.
You know, I grew up in a family of dysfunction, and I moved on from that dysfunction to, you know, carry that dysfunction into my own life, which led to years of active addiction in this community. And, you know, active addiction comes with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And, you know, it's through that pain and suffering that I eventually, through many trials and errors, ended up in a program in Wabasha County called Drug Court. And I'm sure we've all heard of drug courts, right?
Yes, we have.
And, you know, the only thing that I don't like about that is drugs are the problem. So why isn't it called Recovery Court? Because, you know, that's really where my recovery was first treated in a long-term way, right? I didn't get my substance use disorder overnight. No. That was years and years in the making. And so it was through having a long-term program with high accountability that I was finally able to come out of that fog and begin to recover. And, you know, that recovery journey has been going on for me now for... I'll be having 16 years of recovery this year.
Wow, that is amazing.
That's amazing.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's quite the milestone. When did it get really bad for you? What was the, you know, and I've heard your story many times, but can you go into where you were huddled in the you know, in the corner of your room, and can you go into that a little bit? That story.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like I said, none of it's good. You know, addiction leads to very, very bad places, and it leads to isolation. And I mean, ultimately, that's where it led to for me. It led to isolating in my own home and really not being able to escape my own thoughts anymore. And, you know, those thoughts impacted with chronic methamphetamine use. really brings you to some dark places. And through that isolation, I think that was night before I was arrested. I wanted it all to stop, and I just couldn't take what was going on within my own head anymore, and just prayed for God to please make it stop. And I ended up with my home being raided for the fourth or fifth, that you can't even keep track after some time in that life, and through that home raid is where I ended up being charged with manufacturing methamphetamine, losing my children to the child welfare system, and getting an opportunity through the Wabasha County Substance Abuse Court, which I call Recovery Court, to really heal and regain custody of my children. And through that active addiction, that wasn't my first treatment. It was my first inpatient treatment, but of course through my life and being involved with the criminal justice system, I had been to several other outpatient treatments. But active addicts don't make us not smart people. Most of my time through those other treatments were spent manipulating the system, because it's about giving the right answer and getting to graduate the program, not about getting well, because I couldn't see at that time how sick I really was, and I had no understanding of addiction. I didn't know that I had an illness that was progressive, that it was always getting worse. It wasn't getting better. So those things came for me much later, when I got into recovery court, and then began recovering also with a 12-step program that really was beneficial to my life.
Yes, and I know that too, that you also have with the reunification with your children, that you serve on some of the panels for like parenting advocacy, and I know that you're very active in that, and I know that that was one of the biggest components for you, was getting your children back, and I know that you worked really hard for that, and now it's kind of amazing that you're serving on all these advisory boards. And are you still continuing to serve on those advisory boards even today, now that your children, your son Harley is the same age as my Ethan? They're going to be 18 soon, and how long have you been serving on? Are you still continuing to do that, serving on boards with that, and dealing with children, to reunify with their families again?
Absolutely. And, a driving force, and why I really even considered this work, really came through Judge Walters and the drug court team in Wabasha.
Oh, huge. Yep.
Encouraging me to go to school. Mm-hmm. And further my education. I mean, it's not really easy to find employment, so when you're in drug court, regardless of where you're at, you have to live in that county. And so I had to live in Wabasha County, so we chose to live in Elgin, Minnesota. And there's not many jobs there in Elgin, I think they got like 3 bars, and
and especially you're a felon. And to get employment, they're not, unfortunately, the choices that we've made some bad choices, but doesn't mean that we're bad people. But a lot of employers will not see it that way. You're a felon, we don't trust you, so to find work is hard, and I know that you did what you had to do to get your children back. I mean, I know personally you've done everything from waitressing to cleaning, housekeeping, Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. But that struggle in finding employment is really when the drug court suggested that I might further my education or consider that, and I think at that time, looking at a months or years in prison because of my manufacturing charge. When they told me that, they said you should look into going to school, but I heard you have to go to college, So, so I guess, at that time I applied and, took the pre-test that you have to take in order to get in. And then they accepted me. I was like, they must just let anybody into college, I mean, I wish today, paying all those student loans, that I knew a little bit more about, having to pay all that back.
The deferment,
yeah, right. And so, I ended up spending 6 years going to college, but through that college and through the experience in drug court and the recovery programs that I became a part of, I really wanted to do more, and after I graduated and moved back to Olmsted County, when I graduated from drug court, is when Judge Walters had sent me an application that the state of Minnesota was looking for a parent to be on the Children's Justice Initiative and Alcohol and Other Drug Project. And that was like back in, I think it started like in 2004, which was the year I was arrested. 2006 is when I graduated from drug court. And I remember the day I opened up that application they were looking for a volunteer up at the state, and it was like 10 pages long. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I got 10 pages to volunteer.
Right.
And then they want me to go all the way to the cities and sit with like judges and these people that have like been locking me up and taking away my kids my whole life, That's what my head, and I'm grateful for a program of recovery. Because of that, I take those things with me to prayer and meditation today. And the following morning when I woke up, a voice just as clear as could be, said to me, what would it have done for you if the day that you had given birth to your son in the hospital, what would it have done if a woman that had recovered, who had been in active addiction while pregnant, had come to you and been able to share a way to get well with you? And I knew at that point that I had to fill out that application, So I ended up filling out the application, and, I had to go up to St. Paul to the Minnesota Judicial Branch and do like this interview with like 8 people. It was like crazy nerve-wracking,
I'm sure.
I'm just like, I don't belong here. What am I doing? And I ended up being chosen as the parent from across the state to represent on that team. And, I remember the first, I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first or second meetings where we had a big meeting up there, and it was, judges and stuff that were sitting at the table. And I was sitting at the table next to this judge. I can't remember what county he was from, but they were talking about addiction, and they had started to talk about, what had happened in the 80s with the crack epidemic. Yep. And we're in the midst of a methamphetamine epidemic right now. And, his question was, what are we going to do with all these meth babies? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do with all these meth babies? And, through my 12-step program and sponsorship, my sponsor always said, you never know who you're sitting next to, Exactly. And I got out my phone and I got a picture of my boys, and I said, you mean these babies? Yeah. I said, it's words like that and the stigma and discrimination that continue to plague a population of people that are not bad people. We are sick people trying to get well, and it's the labeling and the language that you use to describe us that continues
and I think
to cause this.
And I think for myself, that's why it was so important that I wanted to start something like this, is because I wanted to shed light on the stigma of, we've made some bad choices, but it doesn't mean that we're bad people. We do recover. It just so happens for myself that what's worked for me is the walls of Bill W., the 12-step. I'm really passionate about that. I'm loud and proud, just like you. I don't feel the stigma should be there. I think that there needs to be more light shed on this. And, so that's why I'm so grateful, moving fast forward with you now. Now you're all out of, you're doing the college thing. You're going on for your social work degree. And next thing out of the blue, I hear that you're starting Recoveries Happening. What made you decide to take on such an undertaking like that?
And we can look at Recoveries Happening today, but, I was in the moment, I come from a community where sober housing isn't even an option, right? Our sober houses are dope houses in a lot of our, community. Active addiction and people selling drugs is what's going on there. Low accountability, right? And no oversight.
No oversight.
So, I really wanted to do something for my community, but there's no funding for recovery housing, right? And so I really wanted to eradicate that stigma, right? How do I get people to know that, one, this is not who we are, right? And two, we need to be treated just like anybody else that has an illness. And the more that we can be treated with compassion and care, the more likely we are to accept the help that's offered. And so, I really began to develop all my school papers and research on addiction recovery, and I really educated myself on the illness that I had. And through that education and research, is where I learned about this recovery movement that had been going on across our nation for many, many years.
Which is a grassroots.
Yeah. Yep. And that had been going on even in the 60s. But the stigma is so strong that people stopped doing the work. And today I can see why. You know what? This is really hard work.
Yeah.
And you deal with a lot of backlash, and you deal with a lot of, people that got something to say about what you're doing. And, a lot of people take that to heart. And, for me, it's never been about that. It's always been about the people. And so,
and I know for a fact, just because I've kind of been with you through some of this process, I know for a fact that you had to turn yourself into a grant writer to get the grants to get Recoveries Happening going. And I know that you still continue to write grants to keep Recoveries Happening rolling.
Yeah, if you look at the funding that goes into addiction recovery, we get a really minimal slice of the pie here, and it's not treated like other illnesses. So, even the dollars that go into this, but it is ridiculous, right? But I think, everything being grassroots, I went to the community to get funding, and started a walk is really what happened. And the walk was really about saying, you know what, I'm proud that I'm a woman in recovery, and recovery is a good thing, and more people need to know about recovery, because regardless, every treatment that I was in, we spent so much time in the addiction, in the use, and you spend all your time there, and that's why relapse continues to happen. You need to address things, and then you need to move on to focus on the recovery, because you are what you focus on. You want to focus on using and why I used, and the needles and the places and the people. I'll end up back there, right? And we're not going to focus on that. We're gonna be problem focused or solution focused, not problem focused. And so the recovery walk was really to show the positive side of what recovery offers people. And we really wanted to put a face on, what happens when families are reunified. Well, let me tell you, I can tell you what happens, because my family, kids that were in foster care would have grown up in the system, right? I don't know. I mean, the last numbers I saw before we got our kids back were like almost $800,000 that they had already, spent on our case and what it would have cost if my kids would have stayed growing up in the foster care system.
Well, and I think the 5K walk has continued to grow. I was privileged to be able to go to, I've been able to go to most of your walks throughout the years that you've had this, and the event has grown. And you started out the back of the Y, and then ended up at RCTC, and it's just gotten bigger. Obviously now, due to the COVID thing going on, a lot of those events are not going to be happening. But I know that that was a huge thing. All families were coming together to go on the walk to support their loved ones. And I know that you had many people come in as guests and speakers, to give people the opportunity to learn how to use Narcan. I think that, those events have just grown throughout the years, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at, I started the walk in 2011 to bring awareness, and found out about the grant in 2014 and received that grant. So if you look at, the inception of Recoveries happening at 2011, being a walk until 2014, formal operations, bump it up to 2020, and Recoveries happening is over in Northeast Rochester in a 8,000 square foot building. We have 3 intensive outpatient treatment groups. We have a community center, and then we have 9 sober supportive housing units throughout our community, housing 62 people. So, you asked in the beginning, how Recoveries happening has grown. Mm-hmm. I had no idea, Sherry. I mean, the need is how it's grown, right?
The need, yeah.
By the people, for the people. And that's why peer support and authentic recovery support is so vitally important to helping individuals recover.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And without that, and without putting the funding into making that a thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because we hear about 12-step and sponsorship, and I love it. Saved my life.
Yes.
Right?
Me too.
I love it. But peer support isn't sponsorship.
Well, there's many different pathways. Some people do the holistic, some people do Native American, some people are church-based, other people are through the walls of AA, Narcan, NA, there's so many different pathways out there. And what I absolutely loved about what I love about Recoveries happening is that you don't push one pathway on anybody, because people recover differently. We all have our own ways of recovering.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's pretty much what we offer, is a menu of different services. And then a guide. A peer support is really a guide that will help you to, if you want to check out AA or Narcotics Anonymous or Wellbriety, or maybe church is going to be where you want to recover. But just going into these places alone, when, you have created barriers between you and your family who just want you to figure this out and get back on your feet before they want to trust you again. We all need somebody, and that peer support person really helps work as that person to help connect you to these things so that you can begin to build your life. Not another referral that says you should go here, but hey, what is it that you would like to check out and
your
try?
Choice.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that really impressed me so much with Recoveries happening, and I know that you've worked really hard to make this happen, but you have a collaborative with Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we look at the emergency department, for years, they treat addicts and addiction differently, right? Stabilize and get them out of there as fast as you can,
absolutely,
right?
Yes.
Otherwise, we go to a detox center, and we're there for 24 to 48 hours or 72 at the most. And then we're released again, right? So the program that we've set up
Tell me a
gives
little bit about
people
that.
an opportunity. They are offered the opportunity to see a peer recovery specialist in the emergency room. If they agree, some people aren't willing or ready for help yet. And that's not who we work with. I mean, there needs to be a degree of willingness,
Absolutely.
even if it's just a willingness to hear us out, But the connections that can be made through authentic recovery by someone who has lived experience in active addiction can make all the difference in the world. And we've already, been doing this ER program for over a year and a half and have like a 68% of the individuals that we see get into a long-term program. Yeah. And are in the recovery journey now.
So how does that happen?
These would be individuals that were normally just stabilized and released. Right? Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at a 68% success rate and getting them help and services and continuing on in a recovery journey, I mean, we're going from 0 to 68 here.
Well, what I love about Recoveries Happening too, when you go in, I know that you guys carry pagers. You get that page when you've got a certain amount of time to get there. And what I've absolutely loved about it is the follow-up. You guys have had a really awesome turnaround on your follow-up, and to get them assessed, figure out what it is that they need. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Well, and that's what it's all about. I mean, that's what we are. Quickly. We work with that window of opportunity, right? We have a window of opportunity when someone gets a moment of clarity that they're saying, I can't do this anymore. You know what? And too often that window goes unutilized. That window could stay open for 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Yeah. I mean, it's dependent on the individual, but if that's not utilized and then you're not engaging that individual daily, you're going to lose them.
You're going to lose
right.
them. Yeah.
You're going to, and that is why and where we're so effective and so impactful. And we're blessed to be helping these individuals like ourselves,
Absolutely.
I can't tell you how many times in my own addiction I ended up in the ER, right? And yeah, a family comes, but family's also fed up.
They've had it.
We've been able to help get the family support also.
They've heard the excuses over the years, and we all know that with addiction, there's all kinds of collateral damage, and your family is just sick of it.
They're at a loss.
They're sick of hearing that, I'm not going to do this. Nope, I'm not going to do this. And yeah, you're right. They're at a loss. So I love the fact of, how quickly, Recoveries Happening has gone in and has been able to sway that person to give it a chance. I know that you have your team of social workers. I know that you have your team of peer recovery support system. And that is vitally important too. You have to have that right person in there. And what I love about that is that they are also, they're also in the same boat. They're living in recovery themselves. And I think that's huge that they're able to, go in and yep, I've been where you're at.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes all the difference in the world than someone.
So one of my last questions to you would be, where do you see, what is the future goals for Recoveries Happening? Do you have anything else that you're planning on introducing or making it bigger or trying to, just what are your future plans for Recoveries Happening?
Well, I think with, we've grown so big, so fast, right? And so I don't think it's so much about, continuing to grow larger as it is about continuing to build on what we already have. And, we've been working on getting a gym. We really believe in the 8 dimensions to wellness, and too often we see individuals that, put down the drink, they put down the pipe, but then they pick up the fork, and weight gain becomes a huge stressor and issue in the individual's life, and they end up in this cycle of, overeating, and then going back to the depression, and then back to the drug, and then back to recovery. So, we really hope to put in a really nice gym, and we've been working on getting the funding, and, we're going to be planning a capital campaign because we really want to buy our building so that we can put in a restaurant and a coffee barista, and
wonderful.
We would love to do
Great.
Some other social activities that allow us to take over all the rest of the space in our building, and really have a menu of activities and different
A place
things
for people to go. Because I know that, myself being a woman in long-term recovery, when I first came into this, I wish I would have had something like that when I first came in. Because what was offered to me was the halls of Bill W., so to speak, and AA was my pathway. Now you're offering something completely different, and you're growing with it. And I know that, with this COVID thing, we're seeing more people with the whole depression piece, and for you to have things as a place for them to go, to do other things, life is not just, it's not completely recovery. You have to have some fun, which is, which we do. And that is also another stigma, is that, people don't think we have fun, which I have a ton of fun being sober.
Absolutely.
But, that is wonderful that you're going to utilize that space. And I know that you also have individuals working in the smaller towns as well that are peer recovery specialists, and through the countryside, so to speak, and you're utilizing them as well. So that is absolutely amazing. I remember, I got to tell you on a personal note, wow, look how far you've grown. I remember sitting in your kitchen when you first started out doing all this, and your very first 5K walks, and we're sitting at the kitchen, and we're literally by hand folding flyers, writing out envelopes by hand, sticking on stamps, and all the work that you had gone into it. And you weren't getting a salary, you weren't getting paid, you did this all on your own. And now look how far you've come. It's absolutely just amazing.
I always said God had a plan. Let's go with that. This is God's plan, and I just get to be a instrument in His hand, and really blessed and grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It is always I could talk to you all day about recovery. But I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your experience and strength and hope with others. And, I know that Recoveries Happening it's only going to get bigger. And I thank you for all the tireless efforts that you have put into this, your heart and soul, to help the people that are still continuing to suffer. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast of Addiction, Abuse, Recovery, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm sure you did, as I did. I want you to know that if you want to follow along, just go ahead and hit subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Apple Podcast. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Just search out Matt Logan Speaks. We have all kinds of great content for you. Hit the notifications button so that when something new comes up, you're the first to know. Have a great day.